we want those animals that we're raising for those purposes to have a good life. And part of that good life includes giving them a good death. So the first is making sure we're euthanizing at an appropriate time. We're not waiting too long. But then the second piece is that we're choosing a method of euthanasia that's effective for that specific animal. And so then we provide a good death for the animal because it's an effective method.
Swine. Hello, and welcome to our latest edition of Swine Podcast. I'm Jerry Purvis, your host, and today we're very lucky to have Carly Anderson. Carly is a PhD candidate at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, graduate and a graduate research assistant, and also an affiliate of the Animal Welfare Lab at the University of Wisconsin in River Falls. Carly, welcome and glad to have you today.
Thanks for having me.
Very good. Well, if you take a few moments and just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to today.
Sure. So I completed my undergraduate degree in animal science at the University of Wisconsin River Falls. And then from there went on to do my master's at the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine. And I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Nebraska Lincoln. And throughout my undergraduate, master's, and PhD work, my research has focused primarily on captive bolt stunning and euthanasia for pigs.
Eastman serves veterinarians and nutritionists in agrochemical and animal health industries by helping them select, evaluate, and implement innovative nutritional programs. Eastman works with your team to customize your gut health approach in feed and water. Eastman's approach addresses nutritional and bacterial challenges and finds new ingredient preservation and hygiene solutions. Explore ways to accelerate and innovate your programs. Contact the animal nutrition team at eastman.com.
Very good, very good. You know, as a producer, I have to admit that I'm pretty ignorant. We work on getting animals up to market, and once we get them to market, we kind of don't think about what happens after that. But maybe it'd be good just to kind of tell us a little bit about that process that occurs in plants and the stunning process.
Yeah, so two things I guess I want to point out is first is that when we're talking about euthanasia and stunning, they're similar, but there's two different goals. When in stunning, we want to render the animal insensible, but death is ultimately facilitated by the process of bleeding that animal out. So the method doesn't necessarily need to kill the animal. It just needs to make sure the animal's unconscious long enough for that bleed out procedure to occur. But when we're talking about euthanasia on farm, or if an animal makes it to the slaughter plant but isn't ambulatory or is deemed unfit for slaughter, then we want to make sure we make that animal unconscious and cause death. So generally speaking, when we're talking about death in this context, death is defined by the stop of all respiratory or breathing activity as well as heartbeat.
Very good. And so, so two things, and it's working on a farm. This is one area that I know a lot of producers like myself, I participate in this, and it's one of the dreaded, you work and spend your time and you take care of these animals, and for whatever reason, that animal, has to be euthanized. And it's a hard thing to do. I had to send my wife. I had a lab for about 13 years, and had to send my wife to the vet. I just couldn't do it. So I have a trouble with that. But so maybe just kind of differentiate. You've been working on, or let's just start euthanasia on a farm. So what are the things you've been working on in your research to help make that process a lot better?
Sure. So my research on euthanasia has been focused on the use of captive bolt. And so the first thing there is when most people think of a captive bolt, I think they think of the big air-powered captive bolt that you see in like large beef slaughter establishments. But that's not what we're talking about with on-farm euthanasia for pigs. We're usually talking about a handheld device that's fired by a powder cartridge similar to what you would use in a gun. And then the bolt retracts from that device, goes into the pig's head, and it causes damage to the brain, both by bone that it chips away from the skull and then the bolt going into the brain itself. And essentially we're causing death by catastrophic brain damage. That's probably our most common method of on-farm euthanasia for pigs, especially grow, finish, and market pigs. And we see that over a firearm or gunshot use because it's safer for everyone involved. There's not a flying projectile that could harm other animals or if there's other people in the building. And we also see there's less legal loopholes to jump through and legal problems with using a captive bolt as well. And so what we've looked at specifically is the tissue thicknesses at the common frontal placement, which for market pigs is an inch above the top of the eye. And for more mature sows and boars is about 1.5 to 2 inches above the top of the eyes. And then looking at some alternative placements, looking behind the ear directed toward the opposite eye, as well as on the side of the head between the eye and the ear. And essentially what we found through all of that research with market hogs, mature sows and boars, is that the frontal placement, even though there's a lot of tissue thickness there, especially as the pigs age and their sinus cavities expand, is still the least total tissue for that bolt to travel through in order to reach the brain, and has a higher prevalence of the bolt path being within the plane of the brain. So essentially a higher probability that the bolt will also be placed so that it's going to hit the brain compared to the other two.
Very good. So I guess a question, maybe a lot of people in the audience, what led to maybe the predominant use of, and you mentioned safety, obviously safety for the workers at the farms, but what are some other advantages of the captive bolt for euthanasia?
Sure. So I think safety is a really big one because we don't have to worry about applying projectiles. So if we're thinking about a mechanical method, we have gunshot, firearm, and captive bolt. So with those two, there's no flying projectile. If we think about other methods that are used as far as safety goes, electrocution could be used, but then you also have to make sure you have a reliable power source, which isn't always possible. And then you have a backup generator if the power source goes out. But then also you're using electricity in a barn with lots of other animals and potentially more than one person. And so while training is really important with both, I think there's more risk to the human operator in a barn setting with electrocution than there is with a captive bolt. And then we use methods like that over something like barbiturate overdose, which you see with companion animals, because we have to dispose of the carcasses and those leave residues, and there's all sorts of related issues with that.
Right. And as I said, it's a tough thing. When you have to euthanize an animal, it's pretty tough to do that for myself. And I've seen those captive. We've used that in our facilities. So just thinking about euthanasia in general, what are the reasons why this is important?
Sure. So I think there's kind of two pieces. The first is that it's important because if we're raising animals for food and at some point they become sick or injured and we know that they're not going to make it to that end goal, or if, say, they're breeding sow, for whatever reason, she becomes lame or has a prolapse that's severe and she doesn't have a good chance of recovery, we want those animals that we're raising for those purposes to have a good life. And part of that good life includes giving them a good death. So the first is making sure we're euthanizing at an appropriate time. We're not waiting too long. But then the second piece is that we're choosing a method of euthanasia that's effective for that specific animal. And so then we provide a good death for the animal because it's an effective method. But then that's also, when it's an effective method that's worked well, it's easier on the person who has to apply that procedure too. Because like you've mentioned, I don't think there's anyone that likes to route and euthanize pigs. But if you know that the method you're doing is giving that pig a quick and painless death, I think you can sleep a lot better at night knowing that than having to think, oh, I wish I could have done this different, but the tools I had didn't allow me to do it differently.
For sure, yeah. And so as we think about the bolt gun, how easy is that to operate, and is there some margin for error? It seems like do you have to hit a certain spot for that to be effective, or how easy is it for a person to mess that up, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, I would say that we don't necessarily have a quantification of how hard or easy it is for a person to mess up. Using the captive bolt devices themselves, I would say, is pretty straightforward. Um, it's important to have training to know how to use it as well as how to place it. But I think most people, once they've gone through that training process, if there's someone who feels comfortable with the process of euthanasia, they feel pretty comfortable with using the captive bolt. Um, as far as the margin for error, pigs have a relatively small brain compared to the size of their head if we compare them to, say, cattle. Um, so that with pigs, you might have less margin for error than you do with cattle. But where we place that captive bolt on the pig's head is really aiming for a small part of the brain called the thalamus. And that's what some studies in other areas, like looking at rhesus macaque and what causes unconsciousness and consciousness, have identified as being really important. So that is about the size of a nickel. But the brain is a lot bigger than that. And we know that if we hit the brain and cause physical damage, that's good. But we might also cause insensibility if we hit the brain in another spot. And there's also concussive forces at play. So to be completely honest, I don't think we know exactly what that margin for error is, but we want to be within that portion of the skull that we're going to hit the brain with.
Right. And, you mentioned you're an affiliate of an animal welfare lab there at University of Wisconsin in River Falls. Tell me a little bit about that training. Who do you bring in that comes in for training?
Sure. So with my work at the University of Wisconsin River Falls Animal Welfare Lab, they recently established the Humane Handling Institute, and that's a series of workshops that's intended for slaughter establishment personnel. And so right now there's two workshops. The first is focused on building a robust systematic approach to humane handling. So that really focuses on building SOPs and creating logs specific to a given slaughter plant so that they can have what the USDA classifies as a robust systematic approach. The second workshop is focused on training stunner operators on stunning placement and equipment maintenance. So with that, we cover both electrical and captive bolt stunning, and it's really aimed at getting slaughter plant people who are the ones stunning training in a low stress setting where they don't have the USDA looking over their shoulder, and it's an environment where it's okay to make mistakes on the placement because there's not a live animal life at stake, essentially.
So I guess we're moving in, kind of talking a little bit about processing plants, which, and I have to admit, it's been probably 20 plus years. I was in a plant one time, and I'm pretty naive. I can't even remember much about the trip, but maybe talk a little bit about. I'm sure some of our viewers are as naive as I am. What are some of the processes for stunning that go on in plants across the United States?
Sure. So the first thing I want to point out is that in all federally inspected plants, it's legally required that animals are rendered unconscious with a single stun. And so in the US for hogs, we essentially see three methods of inducing that unconsciousness. The first would be our mechanical method, so captive bolt and gunshot. I would say as far as use in plants go, those are pretty small when it comes to pigs. We definitely see them, but they're a minority. And then we have electrical stunning, which you would see some in large sow and door plants and in a lot of smaller slaughter establishments. So I would say probably the majority of plants that take in pigs use electrical stunning, but the majority of pigs in the United States are rendered unconscious by carbon dioxide. That's what our big market plants are using.
So how is that, I never thought about that. So you said, is that carbon dioxide?
Yep.
Yep. And how does that work? And why is that maybe predominantly what the predominant way animals are stunned in the U.S.?
Sure. So carbon dioxide, when we're using it with pigs, essentially induces death by hypoxia. So there's not enough oxygen in the animal's body anymore to maintain homeostasis and for the body to function as it should. So I think probably the primary reason we see that used is because it eliminates the need to handle pigs as individuals leading up to restraint. So pigs are moved as a group, a smallish group of like 5 to 7 animals probably, into a gondola that then cycles them down through carbon dioxide exposure, and then they're essentially put onto a conveyor belt where they're shackled and hoisted. And so it takes two things. Pigs are handled as a group, which we know is easier for them and easier on the people who have to handle them than trying to isolate them into a single file line. And it also removes the person having to apply the process that's making them unconscious, like you would see with electrical or captive bolt.
Yeah, yeah. That'd be for somebody like me, I guess, kind of remove a little bit from what you're doing every day. It'd be a tough job to, be the person doing that every day, I would think. But a little bit about, I never thought about that. Obviously, the training is important so that they do it properly. But what are the consequences if that person you mentioned, they're working at the plant? Let's suppose something goes haywire and you've got a problem. How does that affect that plant?
Sure. So with any stunning method that you're using, the legal requirement is 100% efficacy. So every single animal is rendered insensible with one application every time. With that, the USDA enforces that. So if you miss a stun, whatever the method might be, they can put a retain tag on the restrainer or the stunner itself, and essentially production stops up to that point. So say you're loading hogs into a V restrainer for electrical stunning, the V restrainer might get tagged, and then no more hogs can go through that V restrainer forward. You can continue to process the product that's already through the V restrainer, so any animals that have already been stunned essentially, and those carcasses and everything as far as further fabrication goes can continue, but you're essentially stopping production for a while, which is a cost to the plant. And then it also can create animal welfare challenges because now you have pigs that are on site and can't be slaughtered, but you also have truckloads of pigs that are coming in, and you might not have appropriate holding capacity, and animals can only be on trucks for so long. So it creates a lot of challenges for a lot of different reasons.
Wow, I never thought of being that person has a stressful job for sure. I mean, he's got to be 100% all the time, and basically, I guess what you're saying, he could, if he misses one, they could shut down that plant, and then you've got a domino effect of other animal welfare issues. Yeah. So how do you? What's usually? And I know you mentioned we've mentioned talked previously, and you're a certified auditor. Is that correct?
Yes. So I'm through the Professional Animal Auditor Certification Organization, PACO. I'm a certified meat plant auditor. So that certification process includes like a 2.5 day class where you walk through the North American Meat Institute's audit and audit guidelines. And then what that process is, you take an exam to make sure, you understand what the audit is and how to use the tool. And then you go through 3 shadow audits. So essentially you're doing the audit alongside someone who's already certified. So that way you can understand how it actually works in a plant, because it's very different to understand what the book says and sit at a desk and say, this happens, and to be the person who's saying, that was an animal that fell, or that was an animal that slipped. Because that's one thing that audit is really clear about, is a slip means part of the animal's body, like their brisket, if we're talking about cattle, hit the floor, where slip might just mean they go down a little. And the difference between those is that a fall is a core criteria. So you have a certain percentage, and if you don't meet that certain percentage, you fail the audit, where a slip is considered a secondary criterion. It's more something that's just talked about.
So in these audits, what do you find where you have problems? What is generally the problem? Is it physical, the mechanical, like I said, the people error or mechanical error?
I think it depends a lot on the specific plant you're at. So, and to be honest, the group of animals you have on a day combined with the people that are working on a given day and on a given shift contribute a lot. We have to think about how the animals are handled. Is the stun applied correctly? Is the flooring in the plant appropriate for those animals? Because if it's grooved flooring or concrete stamped, over time, those things get worn. Are the handlers handling the animals appropriately? So if we're thinking about electric prod use, we have to keep that below a certain percentage. And if you apply it to certain areas, like you can't apply it to the face or sensitive areas, if you do, that's an egregious act of abuse. So they're really prescriptive in what's a problem. And then you have to call the problem when you see it. So you don't just record what you saw and then at 2 hours later go up to the manager's office and say, these were all the problems. You call the problem as you see it to the plant personnel that's taking you around the plant while you do your audit, so that it's clear what you saw. And if you disagree, ultimately as the auditor, you usually have the say on what you saw, but that way there's not any surprises at the end of the day with what you saw. And
Right. So what were the steps to become an auditor? Did you pretty lengthy process?
Yeah. So you have to have qualifications. I don't recall exactly what they are. It's a certain number of years of experience, and education counts toward those years of experience, which is nice. And then you register for the class. Like I said, it's about a 2.5 day class, depending on exactly when and where and how you do it. And those classes include some videos on like how do you recognize effective stems, how do you recognize signs of unconsciousness. So, for example, they'll walk through and teach you how to look for corneal reflex, because that's one thing we look for to make sure that if you go to touch the eye of an animal, especially with a mechanical stun, you shouldn't see that eye close at all. They teach you how to look for things like rhythmic breathing, which is really defined as 2 inhale-exhale cycles. And that's especially important with pigs because we see something called agonal gasping, where once they're stunned, they'll stiffen and they'll kind of like, it almost looks like they're exhaling, but it's just the release of air from the lungs, but there's no inhale to it. So distinguishing between what that agonal gasp that we expect to see in some proportion of pigs versus actual breathing that's indicative of the animal still conscious. And then once you go through the training class, you take the exam, and then within a year of passing that exam, you have to complete 3 shadow audits. With a meat plant, you have to do at least 2 species, and that can be cattle, pigs, lamb are the main ones, but it could be something else as well.
Yeah. So you go and you go to these plants and you do an audit, and you said that most of the time, I mean, there's a lot of leeway. You can, you try to help them out as you go, but at the end of the day, you're just there. You're trying to help those people, and sometimes I guess auditors we're always thought the bad guys. Sometimes I guess, but it's all you're trying to help, and I think everybody we want these animals to be as painless. Let that process be as painless and suffer as least amount as possible. So I have to ask you, Carl, how did you? It seems like a topic. Your research is something. Did you ever think that you would be doing studying this area, and how did you get into this area?
Yeah, I definitely did not think I would always be studying this area. So I started my undergraduate degree at UW River Falls as a pre-vet companion animal student. And then for our animal science major here at UW River Falls, an animal welfare class is required. And at that time, it was taught just by Dr. Kurt Vogel. I really enjoyed the class, got interested in it, so I TA'd for it the next semester. And then I took the advanced animal welfare class and competed on the welfare judging team, and kind of through that combination of experiences got really interested in animal welfare and decided that maybe instead of going to vet school and becoming a vet, I wanted to pursue graduate programs related to animal welfare. And so with that, I wanted to get some undergraduate research experience to make sure that, I like the research and everything that goes with research writing and stats. So I worked on an undergraduate research project with another student and Dr. Vogel, and that was focused on looking at tissue thicknesses from the frontal and the behind the ear placement for market hogs using cadaver heads. And then from there, I've kind of continued that work for my master's. I looked at the tissue thicknesses with the frontal, temporal, and behind the ear placement for sows and boars that weigh over 200 kilograms or 440 pounds live weight. And then for my PhD work, I've expanded that work to this population of pigs between 120 kilograms, or like the typical market weight pig, to sows and boars that weigh up to that 300 kilogram, 440 pound mark, because there isn't any literature on those animals. And then Emma Hamilton, an undergraduate student that I've worked with a lot, she recently published a paper looking at the frontal placement and tissue differences between market arrows that are physically castrated, so our typical market hog, and then immunocastrated boars as well.
Wow. So, interesting path. Seems like, a lot of times our pathways can start just on one class, or was it a professor, or just the topic intrigued you that sparked the interest?
I think a combination of the two.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy how, how our professors can have such an impact on our career pathways sometimes. And you think about the good professors and the way they presented the information in the class, and can have a really big impact. So it sounds like it. Now, as far as animal welfare, do you have any other areas of welfare that you have interest that possibly you'd like to look into research?
Yes. So most of my interests are related around the death period of animal welfare, whether that's stunning or on-farm euthanasia. But to be completely honest, pretty much all of animal welfare is interesting to me. That's just the space where I've kind of been able to work, and I've really enjoyed it. And there's a lot of opportunity for research in that space. But related to the work we've talked about, I've also been involved with work assessing humane handling enforcement actions that are issued by the USDA FSIS. So those enforcement actions that result from a misdone or an egregious handling incident at a slaughter plant, and then shut down for a period of time. And so what we've done with those is really trying to understand which species are involved. And to that extent, we see that cattle and pigs make up the majority of enforcement actions. And when we think about total slaughter volume, that makes a lot of sense, because in the United States, we slaughter more beef and pigs than we do, say, sheep and goats. And then also looking at what the causes of those are. So over the years, we've seen that stunning is the most common cause for those enforcement actions. And then within stunning, looking at the type of stun, what the root cause of that failed stun might be.
Yeah. And so just thinking about, what the producer, are some areas that as far as handling, or some things that producers can do to make that process easier and more efficient, as we load the pigs to market, or as they're handled before they're loaded on the truck, before they get to the plant. Are there some things that we can do that maybe can make that process better?
I think the biggest thing being to make sure that pigs that are put on the truck to go to a plant are truly fit for transport and will be able to get off the trailer at the plant and walk. So I think one thing that people don't always realize is that just because an animal can get onto a trailer at the farm doesn't mean that animal can get off the trailer and then make it from where they get off the trailer to where they go to restraint before stunning at the plant, because animals have to be able to walk to restraint. I think we definitely see some issues with market hogs where they're not fit for transport and sometimes they're shipped. But I think that's a bigger problem with cull sows and boars, where they maybe should have been shipped sooner, or on-farm euthanasia would have been a better choice for them.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Sometimes as producers, we wait too late, and the animal is now not even fit to make the travel to the plant. So being able to have some inputs there about when to ship that, for sure, could be pretty important as well. I can see that. So, well, what do you think, as technology is really changing fast, and the adoption, particularly in our industry, is sometimes slow. But what do you think? There's maybe some technologies that maybe are coming down the road that plants and even farms may be using. You got any your crystal ball there? Try to picture what you think. Just in your opinion, what are some areas maybe that that might be used in the future?
I'm not too certain. So my work is pretty, I wouldn't say far removed, but it's not close to technology usage per se. I think one thing that would be helpful is seeing maybe more virtual reality type training for stunner operators or experiences where they can use like model pigs. So one thing we do in the Humane Handling Institute trainings is we have some model heads that are made by a company in Canada and have like Play-Doh brains, and plant stunner operators can practice stunning on those and identifying location. Maybe if there was a way to attach those so they were moving, because right now they're stationary. And we all know that when it's time to stun an animal or euthanize an animal, that their head very well may or may not be stationary. And so I think adding something like that is a training step. So you start with the stationary head, and then the next step is to go to this still not a live animal head, still a model, not even a cadaver head, but it's moving now. So you have the challenge of
more realistic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. So better model, more realistic models to practice on. Because, like you said, it's a job that you're expecting to be perfect when you start and get better. So that's a lot of stress. Yeah, is there a lot of turnover in these plants? People are running the study process.
I would say in plants in general, there's a pretty high turnover, and that I think part of the challenge too is you have high turnover, and stunning isn't something that anyone is willing to do. And it's probably not a job that just anyone should do either. I mean, you want to have a person who's detail oriented and understands the magnitude of what they're doing, but also someone who can remove themselves enough that they're okay at the end of the day, I think. And so I think even though plants have high turnover, the stunner operator in particular is not necessarily a job where we want to see high turnover.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, that would be the last place I'd want to work in a plant, just doing that every day. But it's a thankless job. I mean, it's a very important job. And so it's imperative that somebody knows what they're doing. And, for the animal's sake, for the people, the plant's sake, just being able to implement this function, that's important. So very good. I'm glad I'm sure there's not been a lot of research in this area, but it's an important area. And I think, going forward, consumers are really, and they should be, are really pressing us on how we treat our animals. And, we want to treat our animals. The best productive animals are animals that are well treated. So most all producers want to treat their animals well. But, sure, I think we can learn a lot about animal behavior and trying to understand, where there is areas where we can make their life easier, within reason. And so I think that's something that's going to be coming down. It's here, and we're going to try to, it's a topic that hadn't been talked about, honestly. So there's a lot of research opportunity for sure to learn more about these animals and how to better, make their life easier, and on the farm. So it's very good.
It's time for our famous three.
Well, we're drawing nigh here to our end, and got to ask you three questions. We always ask the end. The first question is what is your favorite resource? As you think about, it doesn't have to be about, you probably read a lot of books about or studied euthanasia, but what are some books that, or resources, your favorite?
I personally really like Google Scholar. So it's a resource that anyone can use. You can just type Scholar into Google, and then anything you search will only give you like scientific literature, or sometimes you'll get laws in there as a result. So if you're trying to find out, if your producer who wants to know what the newest data on X, Y, or Z is, it's a really great way to be able to quickly get to that information. And a lot of times, once you have the paper, even if you get there, you might not totally know what the best new practice is, or if the old practice is still as good based on that paper, but at least it gives you some information. And then there's always a corresponding author on the paper that you can reach out to and contact for more information, or reach out to maybe your vet and they can provide some additional information, or another producer, your nutritionist, or whoever.
Right. Yeah, it's that's a good point. It's amazing. You're not as old as I am, but I can remember. I mean, to go find it, you're literally up at your fingers. You want to find the answer to a question, or find a paper or something about something. I mean, literally in seconds, you've got that paper. So where we had, before we had to go to the library and dig everything out. And I can remember microfiche. You probably don't even know what that is, but we used to have these little, it was little micro thin papers. You put it in there and look at it. So I'm dating myself. I'm old, but yeah, that's a good resource. That's something probably use every day, probably, or most people do. Next, who would you say was your most biggest influencer in your career? And it can be academically, or professor, or a person non-academic that had the most impact on you to get you to where you are today.
Sure. I would say probably Dr. Kurt. He's the professor that taught that animal science, animal welfare class that I took as an undergraduate. And I continued to work with him through the rest of my undergraduate and graduate training. And so I don't think I would know as much or be the scientist or person I am today without having spent as much time with him as I have.
Yeah, it's professors, good teachers are worth their weight in gold. And it's just amazing how they can bring something alive and really put us down pathways in our careers. So very good. And last, what would you say are characteristics or traits that make successful people, let's say researchers? What are some traits that you find consistent with people that are successful researchers?
Sure. I think probably the biggest one that comes to mind is like a strong sense of curiosity. So I think just being open to asking questions, and really kind of that mentality that no question is a stupid question, because there's a lot of areas where something might have been done the same way forever, but we don't have data to support why it's been done that way or why it hasn't been done another way. So asking questions. And then I think being patient is also really important. That one's probably a little harder, but it's important to be patient and make sure you have good, robust data, even when that might not be as quick to give a reward or recognition.
Yeah, very good. I mean, those are good words to live by for sure. We're all when you got a question and you're always looking for solutions, and there's more questions than there are answers for sure. And many times the more we get into it, the more we figure out we don't know. So just keep driving every day. Very good point there. And so it sounds like you're still in that inquisitive mode and still looking for answers. And where do you, as you said before, you think it's hard to say where if things will change with the way we process animals, but are we just going to maybe just keep perfecting what we're doing? And you think that's the pathway?
Yeah. So there's been research into some new ways. So especially when we think about what's been done on the depopulation side with some of the different foam methods. I don't know that those will make it into the slaughter realm of things, but then looking with carbon dioxide, sometimes adding another gas or replacing it with something else. we've definitely seen different things tried. I think there's a lot of research to continue to be done into methods. But I think really the important thing when thinking about all of that research is what we're doing going to improve either the animal's welfare and or the workers' welfare? And if the answer to either of those questions is no, then it's probably not something worth exploring.
Right. Very good. Well, I'm glad somebody's taking up this, and I can assure you, I won't be the stunner, but it's a thankless job, and I'm glad we have people that are working on that, and for the animal's sake, that we're treating all animals as humanely treated as humanely as possible. So very good. Well, I appreciate you coming to our podcast today, and I look forward to hearing more research and more good things. So very good.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. Well, you have a good day.
You too.